For those of you who've been looking for Season 1 of Solarpunk Presents, but haven't been able to find it, here it is. Originally, it was published as part of Solarpunk Magazine's Solarpunk Futures podcast. We're reposting our episodes on our site to make them easier for you to listen to if you didn't catch them the first time. We hope you enjoy them. Also, don't forget to support us by spreading the word about Solarpunk Presents, writing us a review, or subscribing to our Patreon at patreon.com/solarpunkpresents. Hello and welcome to Solarpunk Presents, the companion podcast to Solarpunk Futures. Hosted by Solarpunk Magazine nonfiction editors extraordinaire Ariel, Kroon, and Christina de la Rocha. Ariel and I will be using this companion podcast to Solarpunk Futures to explore solarpunk goings-on in the world today. We'll be interviewing all sorts of interesting people who are doing work in the here and now that will help us get to a solarpunk future. And we'll be talking to each other about the visions of a sustainable, equitable future integral to solarpunk, and about issues we're curious about within the movement or genre, or whatever it is you want to call solarpunk. Welcome to episode 5. So today I will be talking to Dr. Jayde Roberts, a senior lecturer, which for the US people out there is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture at the University of New South Wales, Sydney in Australia. And she is my guru of urban planning. She's on all sorts of great research on how cities grow. And I'm hoping we can talk today about solarpunk has all these dreams of changing our cities so that they're perfect to live in, so that they're resilient against climate change, so they're good for people. And it's good to try to figure out how we could actually take these horrible messes of cities that we live in at the present and turn them into something sustainable and wonderful to live in. So, good morning, Jayde. How are you doing?
Good morning. Not bad.
So let's talk about cities. Let's talk about the city of your dreams. What would the city of your dreams look like?
Oh, goodness. So I'll start first with a caveat, and that is because I come from a design background, from architecture in my undergrad, and then I moved on to look at politics and Asia more generally. In the undergrad education, we talk about the ideal, or we have the utopia, and it's really fun to design the utopia. But as I've gone on to study cities and neighborhoods, I'm more focused on how to help foster environments that are enlivening, that are supportive. So I don't tend to think of the ideal, but what is helpful in the way that people live in that particular place.
What does an enlivening environment look like?
So this one, I can actually go universal. I think an enlivening environment, regardless of which part of the world you're located in, whether it's a place in what some people call the developing countries, some people call the global south, some older folks call the third world, right? Even in those places, an enlivening environment is one in which families, people, children, can actually have opportunities to meet each other, to come to know each other, and help each other when the need arises. I think that's true for LA, where I grew up, Seattle, where I lived for 10 years, and here in Sydney, for sure. I moved to a neighborhood where people actually recognize each other when you pass each other on the street. In my previous neighborhood, people were like, they would avert their eyes. Right. So there's this sense of distance and alienation that is not helpful in your everyday situation. So an enlivening environment needs to be one where there's space for casual encounters via walking, and spaces where people can run, can jump around, can dance and sing if they want to. So a big enough space.
So like sidewalks and parks or streets that you don't have much traffic on.
Yeah, those are enlivening spaces.
But what do you do if people don't look at each other?
I know. Oh my goodness.
I mean, can the design of a city fix that?
The design of a city has the potential to do that if at the neighborhood level that space is there to make it a potential. But then at a district or township scale, or in the US it would be like, I don't know, what's below Torrance? I think in the US it's just Torrance. Oh no, north, south, east, west. Like if you break it up at that scale, you would need to design public transportation and routes of access, shopping, like groceries and pharmacies, schools, so that there's an incentive to walk around and traverse that limited scale of a neighborhood. And so that's another second factor. But in our world, with people moving around so much, with migration being such a huge factor, it's really hard. If a family only lives in an area for 4 years and moves to another country, there isn't enough time to build those relationships. Given the mobility in our world today, you have to put in programming. So you could have a sidewalk, and you could have a park, but then the city or the district has to be like, all right, we have XYZ events planned throughout the year, like once a month or something. And that kind of pulling people together to get them to come to the park for something can help.
Well, okay, so two comments here. One is for everyone listening. Torrance, in case you've never heard of it, like 99.99% of people on Earth, is the town that Jade and I grew up in, those many years ago. You may have heard of Torrance actually if you read or watched Unbroken, because what was his name? The Torrance tornado fellow. Embarrassingly, I'm blanking on his name. Zamperini was from Torrance. Yeah, I just went past the Zamperini field this morning, the little airport they've named after him. Second comment I have completely forgotten about now. It was about the programming. I think I was thinking about schools and how good schools are at creating community, because you've got parents who join the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association, or they've got their kids enrolled in sports, so they're playing like soccer or something like that. That is very much the experience I had as I was growing up here in Torrance. And I saw that my mother at least met a lot of other mothers, and knew it was like this little soap opera she became embroiled in for the years that my brother and I were in school. And is that a universal thing?
I would say so. And I'm glad you brought that up. Schools can be such centers of community. And in California, I can't speak for all of America, but California and Washington State, what is so lovely about schools is that it is clear when the government builds them, they are meant as a public service. So they have tracks, they have tennis courts, they have grounds that are accessible even on weekends. That is not true here. Yeah. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, when I lived in England, it was not true there either. And I was really like, what? You can't go run on the track? You can't go, you can't play on the soccer field? Sorry, football fields. I was also shocked by that. It is
a waste of space. Yeah, because if you're going to put in the tax dollars to build this thing and maintain it, then it's a public service and it should be open. I mean, if I could break that rule here, I would.
Yeah, but you know what? Open. So I'm visiting my parents right now. So I'm back in Torrance. And I've been going for runs a couple of days a week in the morning. And I realized the school grounds are locked now, right?
No.
Because of this school shooting stuff. Okay, I have to break in here and say that I was wrong. I've since learned that the school gates are only locked when school is in session, and the reason for this isn't due to fear of a mass shooting, but because a couple of years ago, someone walked onto an elementary school campus and sexually assaulted a student in the middle of the day. And ever since then, the gates have been locked during school hours, as per district policy. Okay, and now back to our conversation. So there are people who, by carrying out these unspeakable acts of violence toward children, are obviously also injuring the community, but also then ruining this public service that the government is providing, not just to the children and to the families of the children, but to the entire community, to the neighborhoods that coalesce around these schools.
The social trauma or the wounds that gun violence have created in America are severe. And I haven't been back in the States for a long time, so I can't speak from firsthand experience.
Oh, well, everybody's angry here right now about everything.
Okay.
It's very strange to come back if you live outside.
Oh,
It's not like it used to be. But
oh,
on the other hand, you can still go for a walk in the morning and you see people on the sidewalks and they smile and they say hi.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. So there's something there about recognizing that there are shared spaces, whether they are public space or commons or just, well, there are very few unprogrammed spaces in America. But that volume, if we think just in terms of materiality, like that opening has potential, and we can design them well, and we can make sure that they are connected. So like the school now being locked, right? You could have beautiful potential public space, but segregated in any way, whether through a fence or through social norms or through class. Some schools look all fancy, some schools look all derelict. So if those inhibit entry and exploration, then we are losing out on the potential of connection and community. Those are the things that like if I worked for the city, I would be pushing all the time, opening them up.
do cities have a goal of being cohesive to have these clusters of communities in them? Is this a concern that cities have?
Yeah, one of the good things about urban planning is around, I think 18 something. I don't remember the dates now, but the idea of trying to plan the whole city came out of public health concerns because people were sick. There were areas that weren't getting proper water, or there's stagnant water or whatever. So both in the UK and in the US, it was medical doctors who first called out this problem and said, look, we have to do better. We have to make sure that these environments are hygienic. And through that, intellectuals, often the elite came together to try and create rational plans to create a healthy living environment for people. And during that period we'll call it urban history, there were lots of different leaders or thinkers, and some of them even women, although they were quite conservative, looking at how to create better lives.
But
What would it
why?
take?
Why were they doing this? It's just that what was their personal motivation to create better lives among the
It was
riffraff?
partly so in the longer term, it was having witnessed the environmental destruction caused by industrialization. And then as urbanization occurred, not just through factories and things like that, people recognized that their lives were changing, their ways of living were changing. So part of it was conservative, like how do I keep my idyllic life? And actually suburbanization happened in the UK during that time, with women saying, no, we have to take our kids out of these dirty, filthy places and put them in the countryside. And the father can go into work and come home. And there's this idea of a perfect home and a perfect wife. So these shifts compelled urban residents to consider what was happening and how they wanted to shape their cities because they were losing something.
Okay. So do you think that we're on the verge of or in the midst of another big shift?
Oh, I wish.
Okay. Because that would be
they,
interesting, or?
because it's necessary. But for at least the past 20 or more years, there have been clear research and experts saying, look, we can't all have our quarter-acre lot. That is not sustainable. Stop it. We can't keep building freeways. That does not help. Stop it. But this ideal of I should qualify that. Now I'm speaking about the US and Australia. I'm not talking about Europe. In the US and Australia, this dream of what a good life is includes a single home, a detached house with a yard and a car and the quote unquote freedom to do whatever you want. That dream is really hard to reshape. People are really stubborn about it. So even with people who finish their undergrads are thoughtful, interesting, and look at history, they are very attached to the low rise single family home. So it seems like, at least in Australia and Seattle and parts of California, it hasn't hit critical yet. People haven't gone like, oh my gosh, I don't know why it hasn't in California. I should have hit a long time
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah. And so
But it hasn't.
the problem with the detached house and the car and the yard and is, I imagine it's manifold, right? So that's, you're isolated, you're not part of a community except when
Yeah.
you're duking it out with the other members of the PTA. It's also
Mhm.
environmentally completely unsustainable.
Completely. Yeah. The costs are so many. So, as you've already said, the community cost, right? The social cost, the sense of disconnection. Then the environmental costs are at many levels. One, infrastructure. If you think about the roads that have to be maintained, the pipes that have to be put in, the maintenance of the pipes, where the water is sourced, all of those costs are generally hidden from us. Like it's underground, and it doesn't rise to our consciousness until there's a drought or something. But even when that
Oh, I can
happens,
tell you that has not risen to the consciousness here. They've been in
oh
the
no,
depths of a mega drought. The neighbors still water the
oh,
lawn for 2 or 3 hours a day. It's
get
crazy.
out.
It's infuriating.
Yeah.
So how do you, I mean, so if you take a city like Los Angeles, and I've spent the last 20 years coming back to visit my parents and watching it creep further out into the desert, paving over all of this beautiful, just beautiful environment. And so you can have like Panda Express and huge strip malls and condos and houses and all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But so how do you transform that back into something that makes more sense? Is that even
Well,
possible?
it takes tremendous political will, and I don't know that that's on the horizon. I mean, I'm hoping California just keeps going on the sustainability front and takes bolder steps. You would have to put in policy that punishes developers for such blanket development, right? Because right now it's not a punishment, it's incentivized. I don't know the exact policy in dollars, but generally, when you come in and you buy a piece of property and you develop it, you don't have to pay for the infrastructure cost. So, as the company, I don't pay for the infrastructure. The
Okay,
government somehow foots
that's
the bill,
crazy.
whatever,
Wow.
right? And you generally can get around it by saying, well, I'm going to put in this market center, with a big supermarket and some restaurants and a gym and, whatever's hip in California right now. And that's supposed to create a revenue source for the city because the city wants commercial businesses to get money to sustain itself. And that's good. The city needs it. So right now, there's no punishment for that kind of development. As far as I know, I'm not up to date on California laws. So that needs to be changed. But given the recurrent economic crises that we've gone through, it's really hard for a city to be like, I'm going to punish the developer because you got to look at how much revenue you're bringing in to support your city. So it needs to be a policy shift.
Well, and the
I've
people have to want it as well, right? The residents have to want it. In your experience as a someone who studies this, and you've traveled over the world and done all sorts of research, yeah, I guess you don't really call it field research if you're in a city, do you?
I do because I do ethnographic work, so it's still field
Okay.
work.
So
Yeah,
have you ever seen a neighborhood or a city or whatever decide, up, we're going down the wrong path and change course?
you can look for cities where the mayor or the council says you have to put in better public transit. So if you see light rail or subways coming in, then they've caught on like, oh, wait, something's wrong here. We got to make it so that there's publicly accessible transit that connects different neighborhoods together. When you have that kind of hard infrastructure, you're incentivizing at least housing development. No, not just housing and commercial development along the rails because they're accessible. You have more customers, right? So you can set the hard infrastructure to make people come closer. And it has great success stories in like Hong Kong, in Taiwan.
Well, tell us about the
So
success story in Taiwan. I don't know very much about Taiwan, so.
Well, everybody should visit. It is an amazing transformation that I got to observe going back to Taiwan. So I grew up in LA, but my family's from Taiwan, so I would visit every now and then. And what is most impressive to me about Taiwan, and in particular Taipei, is how the rise of democratic culture enabled changes in the city that create this environment where it's a very dense city. It's like, people everywhere all the time. But people are conscientious of each other and actually help when something goes wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Taiwan is incredibly steep as well. Is that correct? Or am I confused?
There are parts of, there's a mountain range on the east side, and then in the basically an alluvial plain in two parts. So most of the settlement is in the flatter areas. So but Taipei is a basin.
Okay, but so you have a very limited amount of space in which you have to pack an awful lot of people. So what is the transformation that city underwent then?
So with democracy being established in the 80s, because it was martial law before then, and at the same time, Taiwan was going through an economic growth period. So money was there. Because even if democracy were there and there was no funding, it would be hard to make all of these things happen. The government became much more responsive to the people, and the people were much more vocal about what they wanted. An extensive underground subway system was established. Many large parks were created that are beautiful. This subway system is great, and it enables you to go to most places in the city. Like I could walk to any subway station in about 10 minutes tops from anywhere and go where I want. It's funded by the government, so the fare is really low. It's very accessible for people even with mobility issues. And by building these subways, developers saw the opportunity. The government was also pushing it. There's a thing called transit-oriented design. And so when cities pursue transit-oriented design, then they say, okay, I'm putting in the rail and there's this property around it. I'm opening it up to a bid, right? You come and you bid, and this is what we expect. We need you to put in a mix of housing. We need you to put in commercial. We need you to put in cultural. We need to put in health services, so that there are these pods of daily life needs close to the rail. And that encourages housing development. So that's been quite successful. Some of it's a little bit pricey. So friends in Taiwan will be like, look, most of us can't afford that. So that is an ongoing issue for most cities, where you need to figure out the economics of new development and how to make sure that even the poor are served by the city. Another aspect that's been successful is how the city saw these rails and stations as a form of civic expression. So some stations are beautiful. So creating this environment and having some public service announcements like, this is how you should behave on the subway.
Oh, really?
You should always make sure to get up if a pregnant lady or an older person comes.
Oh, so more than just don't leave your bag unattended or we will blow it up for you.
You never hear that on the subway. Oh, okay. And the subway makes announcements in 3 languages. So in standard, in Mandarin, which is actually maybe it's not the official national tongue anymore. It used to be. In Taiwanese, which is a Minnan, which comes from the southern part of China in Fujian province, and in Hakka, which is another language from the southern part of China, because those are the languages that a lot of people speak. So it's really cool to ride the subway and just listen to those, because I don't speak Hakka, but I speak Mandarin and Taiwanese. So I'm like, oh, what is that saying in Hakka, right? That's a recognition of who constitutes your public, your citizenry. So that I like very much. What else has Taipei done well? There's just a sense of civic pride because the city put in so much effort and money to create better infrastructure and better public spaces.
Okay, so if you had advice for people, just people, not necessarily people who are on the city council or are employed by the city, but people who live in a city, if you had advice for them for how they could push for big changes, what advice would you give them?
one, it's an uphill battle. It's like Sisyphus. But there are proven strategies. So there's a book by a guy in Seattle about participatory design. And he was just your everyday person and did not like what the city was doing and really pushed the city to work with local residents to improve parks. So in Seattle, when the city wants to improve a park, they have to have a series of, you can say consultation. I don't like that word because it can be so one-sided, but the city has to consult with the local residents. And you have workshops, you can have a participatory design event. So push for that. First you have to know what's happening. So you have to keep up with notices about new development. Because in America, most likely, definitely in Europe and in Australia, if a piece of property is going to be developed, there's the sign on there saying this is going to happen. It's open for comments. In Seattle, there's always a meeting, and just show up and ask questions and then ask to be included in the process. Some cities are better and allow for its citizenry to get to the point of contributing to the decision making. That's rare. Mostly you get to have input and then a committee gets to decide. And that can be frustrating. You might feel like, look, I went to all these meetings and I said X, Y, and Z, but in the end, the decision had nothing to do with what I said. But it takes time to push the council members to the spectrum, to the point in the spectrum wherein you have some say in the decision making. And by being aware and showing up and having a diversity of participants, one can push back against NIMBYism. So if it's a wealthier neighborhood, there often is a sense of protecting my property value and my environment. And so there will be resistance.
But this is interesting because I think when I look at I don't know what the proper modern term for it is, the Western world, the Western democracies, we've all gotten very lazy and we think you show up to vote if you do that at all, and that's democracy. But what you're talking about is really democracy. This is really where you have to be an active participant in things like city council meetings and city planning meetings, and you have to take that time and make that effort. You have to bring your ideas. You have to, it's not just standing on the street and waving a protest sign, but it's actually actively participating in the design of your own city, the refurbishment of your own city. We've forgotten that. We've forgotten that you have to, that it's, fight's not the right word, but on some level it's fight. Fight for these things to have a vision of how you would like to live in your democracy and get other people to listen to it and also to listen to other people's ideas and then work together towards something, and that there are these channels there to do it.
Yeah, and actually cities, as far as I know, so I don't look at every city everywhere, but one of the ongoing frustrations of city councils and people who work in the city is, look, we're trying to reach out to the people who live around here and they don't show up. So communication is a major challenge in urban planning. Like, how do we communicate in a way that people actually notice and would say something? Because usually people don't notice, then you build something and then people are pissed off. It's like, but we tried to say something was coming. That one, who knows how to fix it, but the pace of our lives, the neoliberal world order wherein we are strongly pushed, if not constrained, by the work life that takes so many of our hours, makes both parents work. So who's gonna find the time? And it's like once the democracy was set, it's like it's supposed to be on autopilot, because in the modernist rational mindset, you create a structure, you create a system, and it's supposed to be efficient. It's supposed to just work. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't just work. And if we just let it run, I would say that's part of the problem. We let it run, it's more rational, it's more efficient. We focus on the dollars and the quantifiable. And if the spreadsheet all looks okay, there it is, it's working. We're not monitoring it. We're not questioning the really mechanistic logic of these systems.
Oh, I
So
think most of us just don't even realize that there are mechanisms there, right? It's all done by them. It's all handled by the man or the evil electric company and the incompetent this. And, you don't really get the feeling that if you show up at a city planning meeting, that your input would count for anything, right? Or you see the people who show up and they block everything, the NIMBYs, as you say. And then it's easy, I think, to get very cynical about the process. But yeah, maybe
yeah,
we should all be telling each other, hey, we need to do more. And we need
yeah,
to, because we do have the power to participate in this process of planning the changes in our cities or planning the new developments in our cities. And my voice is important, and my community, I would like my community to be a great place where we all not get along because neighbors, but where it's a nice place to live for as many
yeah,
people as possible. Yeah. And so
yeah,
maybe we should be reminding each other this is a key part of democracy. And it's a
yes,
privilege as well, because there's plenty of parts of the world where you have no say in this at all.
yeah, yeah. And it is through that level of responsibility, really, and commitment that we live in democracy. Some people in the past really duked it out and tried to set up laws and policies as the foundation of how we live. But the foundation wears out. So we can't just keep eating away at it. We need to understand how that was built, right? So if we show up at a council meeting, it's not just to be pissed off that my neighbor's building 4 stories taller than mine and blocking my light, but there should be some homework. Like, okay, this is how this works here. Do some reading, read about your city, read about the policies, rather than just reacting to protect your own self-interest.
But it's
And
hard to
that's
read policy because
it is.
it's impenetrable, and that also maybe needs to change.
There has been some shifts. So for those who are interested, the city of Chicago did this great initiative, not perfect, but great. So the Institute of Architecture there and people in the city and some young kids drew a comic book talking about urban planning. And it's based on Daniel Burnham's work for the World Exposition in whatever, 19 something, way back.
Yeah,
It's the white
1928 or
city.
something like that.
Yeah, right.
Wrong. Sorry, here I am breaking in again to say that I was wrong again. The World's Columbian Exposition, also known as the Chicago World's Fair, whose director of works was this urban designer named Daniel Burnham, was held in 1893. What I was thinking of was the next Chicago World's Fair, and I was also wrong about that. That was in 1933. So, okay, and now back to the conversation.
So he was like, there are no small plans. And he really pushed for his vision of a better city. That vision is problematic. But the message in the comic book is all of us, even you kids, right? The target audience is school children. Even you kids can have a voice in urban planning. And this is how it can be done. So there are little initiatives like that. So the comic book came out probably 5 years ago, and there's take up among school children. I haven't gone back to look at, like post event surveys or anything like that. And that's a hard part with any research, particularly in urban planning or in architecture, anything where it's more applied. It's really hard to get funding for the post, like the post occupancy research or the post project evaluation. There's almost no dollars. And so then like, well, who's going to go back? But there was interest among school children.
Oh, okay.
And I think that, it's a viable and important avenue to keep on.
Okay, but I like this idea that if you want to get your fellow citizens to band together and start working on rebuilding your neighborhood or the city and to make it into a more livable environment, then you can come together and create a graphic novel or a comic book and get it printed, or even just make a PDF out of it, send it to all your neighbors and see what happens.
Yeah.
And then this
Yeah.
strengthens your democracy and ties your community together. This all sounds wonderful. I mean, obviously it's this is the rosy pink, this is looking at it with rose tinted goggles, but it's kind of a nice idea, full of hope.
It is. Yeah. And if lots and lots of people do this, then there is this momentum. You know, if it's just you and me, you in Germany, me in Sydney, well, it's not going to do anything. But if I get one person in every, here it's called district, in every district to work with me to draw this comic book, and we distribute it, you know, in the 5-block area that we live in, there will be some kind of little tremor, some kind of response, because the possibility becomes evident. So, you know, there's been a lot of grassroots work like this throughout decades that have made a difference at the local level, and at times filtered up to the national level at times.
Yeah, well, national is a big level, especially in a really big country. But okay, so I guess for our listeners, solar punks out there, you have your homework. Get to it. And you don't have to just design big buildings full of solar panels. It can also be little parks and subway systems and trams and even better bus lines. Okay, yes. I think I've eaten up quite a lot of your time this morning. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about urban planning and how people can perhaps change their cities for the better. And I guess I shall now think about joining the city council planning meeting, exercising, strengthening democracy through participation.
You'll have to be very, very patient, but in the long run, it'll be good.
And that was episode 5. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've been inspired now to go out and start working on making your city a better place to live. Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents, a series embedded within the Solarpunk Futures podcast, written, hosted, and produced by Christina de la Rocha and Ariel Kroon. This podcast is a part of Solarpunk magazine, which is published by Android Press, which is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. The opening and closing music for Solarpunk Presents is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol and is available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License. So, thank you again for listening, and until the next episode, stay Solarpunk.